Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you're joining us. I'm Sam.
Luna's here with me, and we're settling in for another cozy money conversation.
Absolutely. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really fascinating book, Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness.
hmm
And it's great because it's not really about the complex charts or market forecasts.
Exactly. That's what makes it so powerful. Housel's whole idea, which we'll dig into, is about these hidden forces of economic behavior.
Hidden forces. Okay.
Yeah, so it's less about spreadsheets and like economic data and more about us, humans, our feelings, our past experiences, our little quirks. All the stuff that actually drives how we deal with money.
Right. It's the human element.
It really is. Less about what the market's doing and more about, well, how we react to it.
So the mission for you listening is to pull out some key insights from this to help understand why we make the money decisions we do and, hopefully how to make slightly better ones.
Mm.
Think of it like learning to make your perfect cup of coffee. It's not just the beans and water, right? It's the whole ritual, how you feel, the mood. It's kind of similar with money, getting to what really influences things.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, so let's jump into the core idea. Housel basically says doing well with money. It has surprisingly little to do with how smart you are
Yeah,
and a lot more to do with how you behave. That kind of flips the script, doesn't it?
it totally does. And he uses these two, like, really powerful stories right at the start to show this.
Okay.
So first, you've got the super successful tech guy, genius level, patented Wi-Fi stuff in his 20s, sold companies for millions, brilliant.
Wow. Okay. Sounds like he had it made.
You'd think so, but he ended up completely broke. Not lack of brains, but just terrible behavior.
How so?
Well, there's this story where he like smashes a $500 lamp in a hotel restaurant because he was annoyed. Yeah. And then when the manager comes over, he just throws a stack of $5,000 cash at him. Just pure contempt. That kind of impulsive, destructive behavior. Well, it caught up with him.
Wow. That's, yeah, a stark contrast then to the other story.
Exactly. The other story is about Ronald Reed, a janitor and gas station attendant from Vermont. Very modest life.
Okay.
Fixed cars, swept floors, lived in a small house he bought for like 12 grand. Quiet guy.
Right.
But when he passed away at 92, he made headlines because he'd accumulated over $8 million.
$8 million. A janitor. How?
Yeah.
No lottery?
Nope, no lottery, no big inheritance, nothing like that. He just saved what little he could, consistently. Put it into ordinary blue chip stocks, and then he just waited for decades and decades.
Patience.
Incredible patience, simple discipline plus time and compounding turned into this huge fortune, which he then left at the local hospital and library.
That contrast just perfectly illustrates the point, doesn't it? Ordinary folks, no finance background,
Yeah.
can build real wealth if they just master a few behavioral skills. Patience, discipline, stuff we often overlook.
Exactly. It's not about being the smartest person, it's about managing yourself.
But, in today's world, it feels like everything pushes us towards now, towards instant gratification. How do you actually build that Ronald Reed kind of patience? Is it just willpower?
That's a really good question because it taps right back into those hidden forces.
Yeah.
It's less about complex strategies and more about consistent habits and emotional regulation.
Okay.
You cultivate it by understanding your own triggers,
Yeah.
what makes you want to spend. Setting really clear long-term goals helps too. And maybe building systems like automatic savings so you don't rely on willpower all the time.
Automating it.
Yeah.
Takes the decision out of it sometimes.
Yeah, designing your environment to kind of nudge you in the right direction. Because let's face it, wanting things now is pretty human.
It really is.
Yeah.
Which brings us to another fascinating point from the book. People do crazy things with money. But Housel argues no one is crazy.
Yeah.
That feels counterintuitive at first glance.
It does. But what he means is everyone's reality is different. We all build our own mental model of how money works based on our specific life experiences.
Right, like where you grew up or when you grew up.
Exactly. Imagine growing up dirt poor versus being raised with wealth, or living through hyperinflation versus stable prices. Someone who saw the Great Depression. Their view of risk is going to be totally different from someone who came of age during the dot-com boom. Right.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And the statistic he uses is just mind-blowing. Your personal experience might be, what, 0.00001% of world events.
It's a tiny fraction.
But it shapes like 80% of how you think the whole world works financially.
It's a huge bias. And
Yeah.
he gives the lottery ticket example.
Ah, yes.
Americans spend so much on lottery tickets, more than movies, games, music, sports, books combined.
Wow.
And it's predominantly lower-income households buying them, spending maybe 4 times as much as higher earners on average.
Which, from the outside, looks irrational. Spending maybe $400 a year on tickets when you might struggle to find $400 for an emergency.
Right. It seems illogical. But Housel explains the psychology. For someone with limited income and maybe few prospects for a big raise, saving feels impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So buying that lottery ticket, it's maybe the only time they get to hold like a tangible dream, a dream of getting the stuff that, others might take for granted. They're paying for hope, not just the odds.
Paying for the dream.
Mm.
That puts a different perspective on it.
It really does. What seems crazy to you might make perfect sense to me based on my life. It reminds us to be a bit more empathetic, I think.
Definitely. And it's also worth remembering just how new a lot of this financial stuff is for everyone.
Yeah, so true.
I mean, widespread retirement planning.
Yeah.
The 401k only started in, 1978?
Yeah, barely 2 generations ago.
And the Roth IRA is even younger, 1998. And universal college access with all of the student debt that comes with it.
Yeah.
That's relatively recent, too.
We're all kind of newbies at this, figuring it out as we go along, collectively.
Well, no wonder some decisions look crazy in hindsight. We're all learning.
Absolutely. And if we're talking about things outside our control, that leads perfectly into the next big idea, luck and risk.
Ah, the twin forces.
Exactly. Housel says they're siblings. You can't really believe in one without respecting the other. Our outcomes aren't just about effort.
Right. And the Bill Gates story illustrates the luck part so well. Obviously, brilliant guy, worked incredibly hard.
Undeniably.
But Housel points out that 1 in a million luck of attending Lakeside School in 1968. One of the only high schools in the world with a computer then.
Yeah, more advanced than most universities had at the time.
Gates himself says no Lakeside, probably no Microsoft.
Now, contrast that immediately with Kent Evans,
His friend.
his best friend at Lakeside. Gates said he was the top student, just as smart, just as driven, shared the same computer obsession and business ambition. They planned future ventures together.
So he could have been right there with Gates.
Easily. Could have been a co-founder. But Kent Evans experienced the other side of the coin. 1 in a million risk.
No.
He died in a mountaineering accident before graduation.
Oh, wow. That's incredibly sad and really hammers home the point.
It does. It means when you look at financial success, yours or someone else's, Housel says it's never as good or as bad as it seems. Luck and risk are always playing a part.
That really changes how you should look at things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? Knowing luck and risk are so huge, does that change how we set goals? Or measure our own success?
I think it fundamentally changes the conversation. It's not about giving up or saying effort doesn't matter. It does. But it's about adding humility.
Okay.
It means building in buffers, that margin of safety we'll talk about. Realizing you can do everything right and still get hit by bad luck, or do some things wrong and get saved by good luck.
So focus on what you can control.
Precisely. Focus on your savings rate, your behavior, your mindset, your long-term view. Those are within your sphere of influence. Don't obsess over hitting a specific market return you can't control. Success becomes less about a number and more about resilience, Being able to keep going.
Resilience. I like that. Okay, let's shift gears to another potential trap. This idea of never enough.
Oh, this is a big one. Such a dangerous psychological loop.
Yeah. The book tells that story about Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22.
Mm-hmm.
John Bogle from Vanguard points out that some hedge fund manager made more in one day than Heller made from his massively famous book, ever.
Right. Kind of a jarring comparison.
But Heller's reply was just perfect. He said, yes, but I have something he will never have.
Yeah.
Enough.
Boom. Just enough. Such a powerful concept and so rare, it seems, especially at the extremes.
We see these crazy examples, right? Rajat Gupta, CEO of McKinsey.
Yeah.
Worth $100 million.
Already unimaginably wealthy.
But he wanted more. He wanted to be a billionaire, risked literally everything, reputation, freedom for insider trading, ended up in prison.
And Bernie Madoff had immense wealth, power, respect, threw it all away running a massive Ponzi scheme. Why? Just more.
They had everything they needed, and so much more. But they risked the things they truly did need. Freedom, integrity, family, peace, for something they absolutely didn't. They didn't know they're enough.
It's tragic, really, and it ties into how we even perceive wealth. Housel talks about this man-in-the-car paradox.
The valet observation.
Exactly. He noticed, working as a valet, when people saw a fancy car, like a Ferrari, they didn't really admire the driver.
Right. They didn't think, wow, that person's cool.
No, they thought, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool. They use the car as a mental benchmark for the admiration they craved.
It's subtle, but yeah, a big difference.
And it leads right into wealth is what you don't see. Real wealth isn't the flashy car or the big house. That's just money that's been spent.
That's richness, maybe. High income spent visibly.
Exactly. Wealth is the money you haven't spent. It's the stocks, the bonds, the savings accounts that haven't been turned into stuff yet. Wealth is hidden. It's options, flexibility, future potential.
So that fancy coffee mug doesn't make you financially warm. It's the savings, the coffee inside that really matters.
Perfect. And it circles back to enough. Knowing what's truly valuable: reputation, freedom, relationships, happiness, and realizing no potential financial gain is worth risking those things.
Okay, so if wealth is often hidden and grows over time,
Yeah.
let's talk about compounding. Housel calls it the eighth wonder,
He
right?
does, and he uses these cool historical examples like ice ages, tiny changes in temperature or snowfall accumulating over thousands and thousands of years.
Lead to massive glaciers carving out landscapes, huge outcomes from tiny inputs over vast time.
Exactly. Now apply that to money. Warren Buffett is the prime example.
Right, his net worth is staggering, but the timing is key.
It's almost unbelievable. Of his, say, $84.5 billion net worth, $84.2 billion of it came after his 50th birthday.
After 50.
And get this, $81.5 billion came after he was eligible for Social Security, like mid-60s onwards.
So his secret isn't just being a brilliant investor.
He is brilliant, no doubt, but his real superpower, longevity. He's been a phenomenal investor for, what, 3/4 of a century? Just consistently good year after year after year.
The consistency is key.
Compare him to Jim Simons at Renaissance Technologies. Simons actually achieved way higher annual returns, like 66% a year since '88, versus Buffett's 22%.
Triple the return rate.
Yeah, but Simons has about 75% less wealth than Buffett. Why? He only really hit his investing stride when he was 50. He just hasn't had as many decades for that amazing compounding to work.
So the takeaway is, good investing isn't always about chasing the absolute highest, maybe unsustainable returns.
Right. It's more about getting pretty good, solid returns that you can actually stick with consistently for the longest possible time. That's when compounding goes wild. It's an endurance game.
Endurance, not a sprint, which
Yeah.
perfectly sets up the next point. Survival. Getting money and keeping money are different skills.
Totally different. Getting rich might involve taking big risks, being really optimistic, keeping it. That requires humility, frugality, maybe even a little bit of paranoia.
Yeah. Thinking about what could go wrong. The book mentions Jesse Livermore again,
The great trader. Made a fortune in the '29 crash.
but couldn't hold on to it. Brilliant at getting it, terrible at keeping it, ended tragically. And Abraham Jermansky, the real estate guy in the same crash. Same pattern.
Masters of accumulation, failures at preservation. And then there's Rick Guerin. Buffett and Munger considered him just as smart. But as Buffett said, Rick was in a hurry. He got over-leveraged. When the market tanked hard in '73, '74, he had margin calls and was forced to sell his Berkshire stock to Buffett at a low price,
Ouch. So Buffett and Munger had that extra skill, the staying power.
which over the long run is arguably the more important skill.
So how do you build that staying power? How do you survive?
The key is what Housel calls room for error, or margin of safety. You have to accept that you can't predict everything.
Like the German tanks and the mice.
Exactly. Who plans for mice eating electrical wiring in their tanks? You can't foresee every risk.
So you build in buffers.
You do, like Bill Gates back in the day, insisting Microsoft always have enough cash to cover a year's payroll, even with zero revenue.
Wow, a whole year.
Or Buffett always running Berkshire with more than ample cash so he can sleep at night, no matter what the market does.
So room for error isn't about being scared or too conservative. It's strategic.
It's totally strategic. It increases your odds of long-term success simply by increasing your chances of surviving the inevitable bumps and shocks along the way. It lets you endure the volatility so compounding can keep working for you.
Okay, endurance, survival. What's the ultimate goal then? If it's not just the biggest number.
Housel argues the highest form of wealth, the ultimate prize, is control over your time. It's the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today.
Freedom.
That autonomy, that control, that's the highest dividend money pays. Far more valuable than fancy stuff.
That really resonates. I love the story of Derek Sivers.
Oh yeah, the musician.
By 22, he'd saved just $12,000. Enough to quit his low-paying job and just be a full-time musician. And he said he felt truly rich then, because he'd bought his freedom. Even when he later sold his company for millions, he said that feeling at 22 was the real turning point.
That feeling of control. And it links straight back to savings. Building wealth, Housel argues, isn't really about your income level or even hitting home runs with investments.
It's about the savings rate.
Exactly. It's the most direct lever you can pull. Finance's version of conservation and efficiency. You increase your wealth by increasing the gap between what you earn and what you spend.
And you don't even need a specific reason to save all the time, right?
That's such a powerful idea. Of course, save for retirement, save for a house, that's smart. But also, just save, period.
For the unexpected.
Yeah. Saving is a hedge against life's inevitable ability to surprise the hell out of you at the worst possible moment. It just gives you options, flexibility, breathing room, time to think.
Every dollar saved buys a little bit of that freedom, that control.
Which leads us towards wrapping up, acknowledging our messy human selves. Housel says, you're not a spreadsheet, you're a person, a screwed up, emotional person.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So the goal isn't to be perfectly, coldly rational all the time. That's probably impossible. The goal is to be pretty reasonable.
Reasonable, not rational. What's the difference there?
Reasonable is practical. It acknowledges emotions, context, real life. Rationality might be mathematically pure, but maybe unsustainable for actual humans.
Like the medical story he tells about curing syphilis with malaria.
Yeah, Julius Wagner-Jauregg won a Nobel for it. Inducing fevers fought the syphilis. We know fevers can be good, fight infection. That's the rational view, maybe?
But fevers feel awful.
Exactly. So we take Tylenol to stop the fever because it feels better. That's being reasonable. It might not be biologically optimal in that one narrow sense, but it makes life bearable.
Okay, I see the analogy. Apply that to finance.
Harry Markowitz won a Nobel for modern portfolio theory, the math behind optimal diversification. How did he invest his own money?
Not using his own complex theory.
Nope. Simple 50-50 stocks and bonds. Why? Not for max returns, but to minimize future regret. He wanted something he could stick with emotionally.
He was being reasonable for himself.
Exactly. A rational investor might use just numbers. A reasonable investor considers their spouse, their colleagues, their own sleep quality, finds a strategy that works in the real messy world.
It's like adding cream to your coffee. Maybe not pure, but if it helps you enjoy it and stick with the habit, it's the right choice for you.
Perfectly put. It's about sustainability for you.
Okay, and one last big theme. The future is surprising. History is a guide, but not a map.
Scott Sagan's quote, "Things that have never happened before happen all the time."
That's a great quote. We fall into that trap, don't we? The historians as prophets fallacy.
You do. We look at past data, especially in finance, and assume the future will behave the same way. But things change fundamentally.
Like how venture capital works now,
Yeah.
or 401ks changing retirement. The underlying conditions aren't static.
So the lesson from past surprises isn't, okay, now we know the boundaries of what can happen. The lesson is just, the world is surprising. Full stop.
We have no idea what's next.
Pretty much. Which means the best defense is not trying to predict the unpredictable, but building that resilience, that room for error.
And defining your own game. Don't get swept up in what day traders or bubble chasers are doing if you're a long-term investor. Play your game.
Exactly. Stick to your reasonable plan.
Okay, this has been fantastic. Let's try and distill some key takeaways for everyone listening.
All right. First, less ego, more wealth. Remember, saving is just the gap between your ego and your income. Increase the gap.
Good one. Second, manage your money primarily so you can sleep well at night. That's probably the best universal benchmark.
Definitely. Third, use money to gain control over your time. That autonomy, that freedom, that's the highest dividend.
Fourth, know that success has a cost, usually involving volatility, uncertainty, dealing with downturns. See it as a fee you pay for potential returns, not a fine for doing something wrong. Be ready to pay it.
And fifth, worship room for error. Build in those buffers. It's what gives you the endurance to let compounding do its amazing work over the long haul.
Love it. Okay, so for a small action step today, we encourage you to start a surprise fund.
Simple, but effective.
Yeah, just money saved with no specific goal. It's your personal hedge against, well, life being surprising. Just start putting a tiny bit aside regularly. Think of it as your financial emergency coffee break fund.
Great idea. And remember, overall, there's no single right answer here. It's about finding what works for you, for your family, what lets you feel comfortable and sleep soundly. That's a wrap on today's Coffee and Sense. Take what serves you.
Leave what doesn't.
And know that we're always here for your next financial coffee break.
See you soon.